Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Silent Zone 2025, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. In a cinematic landscape dominated by loud action and non-stop noise, Silent Zone enters with a whisper, and somehow it's that very whisper that leaves the loudest echo in your mind. Set in a future not far from our own, the film takes a genre we've all seen before, sci-fi thriller, and injects it with a quiet, smoldering intensity that unfolds with unnerving calm. Directed by Ava Sloan in her stunning sophomore feature, Silent Zone doesn't just aim to entertain. It wants to unsettle you, to crawl under your skin and ask uncomfortable questions about the world we live in and the one we're hurtling toward. From the first frame, it's clear that Silent Zone isn't going to play by traditional genre rules. The opening sequence is stark, almost hauntingly still. A wide, endless stretch of desert. A black van parked in the center. And then silence. No music, no soundscape, just the wind and the slow, deliberate breath of our protagonist, Cam Reed, played with a quiet ferocity by rising star Janelle Ward. There's no dialogue for the first 4 minutes. Just motion, observation, and that deep looming sense that something isn't right. It's hypnotic. And then, without warning, a burst of static, a digital glitch, and a flash of text that simply reads, "Entry denied. Zone is active." The story drops us into a near-future version of Earth where vast sections of the planet have been designated as silent zones. These aren't your average off-limits military compounds or quarantined nuclear wastelands. These zones are entirely cut off from sound, not muted, not muffled, but completely, impossibly silent. No bird songs. No footsteps. No human voice. Sound waves simply vanish inside these areas, and no one fully understands why. The official government explanation? Natural anomalies. But when has that ever really been the truth? Cam, a former military linguist turned rogue investigator, has been obsessed with these zones for years. After losing her sister to one of them, a mission gone wrong, no body ever recovered, Cam has turned her life upside down trying to unlock the mystery. She believes the zones aren't natural at all. She believes they're evolving, expanding, and possibly communicating. And in Silent Zone, her investigation takes her into the most unstable zone of them all, Delta 9. The plot moves with precision, never rushing, always building. Cam isn't alone on this journey. She's joined, reluctantly, by Agent Ezra Malik, played by veteran actor Theo Lane, a by-the-book intelligence officer who initially views Cam as a threat to national security. Their dynamic is electric. At first, it's all conflict and mistrust. But as they navigate deeper into the Delta 9 zone, encountering terrain where drones fail, GPS distorts, and even their own thoughts seem to echo against their minds, the partnership becomes one of necessity, then respect, and finally something far more complex. The first half of the movie plays like a high-stakes infiltration thriller. Cam and Ezra, dressed in high-tech sensory suits, venture into the zone under the cover of night. They carry specialized equipment to monitor vibrational feedback, electromagnetic fields, and most importantly, the elusive audio voids, pockets where even digital signals are consumed. As they go deeper, the world around them becomes increasingly strange. Time seems to warp. Light bends oddly. Trees don't sway in the wind, they stand frozen, as if waiting. It's eerie, mesmerizing, beautiful. And then they start seeing things. Not hallucinations, exactly. More like memories, but not their own. Ghost-like figures appear at the edges of their vision. Men in old uniforms, children in hospital gowns, strangers who seem to move as if trapped in a loop. The zone doesn't just remove sound. It seems to record lives, like an archive of forgotten voices now trapped in visual fragments. And Cam begins to suspect that the zone isn't a place. It's a being. Alive. Sentient. Watching them. But this is where Silent Zone begins to shift, pulling the rug out from under the audience in the best way. Midway through the film, a major twist reframes everything. Just when Cam and Ezra believe they've found the core of the anomaly, a buried lab sealed beneath layers of sediment, they discover not remnants of failed science experiments, but something more human. A room filled with recordings. Voices. Thousands of them. Whispered fears. Cries for help. Confessions. Some of them recent. Some of them ancient. And among them, Cam hears her sister's voice. This discovery sets off a chain reaction. Not just in the zone, which begins to destabilize, but in Cam herself. She becomes consumed with the idea that the zone has preserved her sister, somehow holding onto her consciousness within its soundless realm. But the cost of accessing it is steep. The silence begins to take a toll. Cam and Ezra both start experiencing cognitive breaks, difficulty distinguishing thought from memory, present from past. The film visually plays with this disorientation. Scenes loop back on themselves. A conversation is repeated with a different outcome. A gun is fired, and there's no impact, only a flash, and then the scene resets. And that's when the real question begins to emerge. Is the silent zone a prison or a refuge? It's a theme that runs throughout the film. What we silence, what we suppress, and what happens when those silences begin to speak. Cam's past trauma, her guilt over her sister's disappearance, her distrust of authority. All of it becomes amplified inside the zone, as if it were built to reflect the minds of those who enter. Ezra's secrets begin to surface too, revealing a connection to the zones he's kept buried for years. Their conflict becomes personal, not just with each other, but with the versions of themselves the zone is forcing them to confront. The climax of the film is breathtaking in its restraint. Rather than culminating in a battle or escape, it centers around a decision. Cam, standing at the heart of the zone, a space so silent that even her heartbeat cannot be felt, must choose whether to leave with the data that could expose the truth, or stay, and risk losing herself in the same way her sister did. The silence, now revealed to be a protective force, offers peace. Not death, but release. A world without noise, without pain, without chaos. It's tempting. And the film lingers in that choice, stretching it into a final, aching beat that leaves the audience suspended. Does she walk out?
The film doesn't answer. It ends with a shot of Cam's face, eyes closed, a single tear falling, and the sound of a heartbeat faintly returning to the mix for the first time since the climax began. It's a bold ending, one that doesn't spoon-feed resolution, but instead invites interpretation. And that's exactly what audiences have been responding to. Early screenings of Silent Zone sparked debate. Was the zone alien? Government-created? A psychological construct? Was Cam alive at the end? Did she merge with her sister's memory? Or did she finally let go? Theories spread online like wildfire, and the filmmakers, true to the spirit of the story, have refused to clarify. And that's what makes Silent Zone so compelling. It's not just a sci-fi mystery or a sleek thriller. It's a meditation on grief, on memory, on the things we try to bury beneath the noise of our lives. It asks what would happen if we were forced to sit in that silence. To listen, not to others, but to ourselves. The performances elevate the material beautifully. Janelle Ward is magnetic, holding the screen with a blend of strength and fragility that never feels forced. Theo Lane, with his deep voice and commanding presence, gives Ezra complexity and unexpected warmth. The chemistry between them isn't romantic in a conventional sense. It's deeper, built on trust, shared pain, and mutual reckoning. Visually, the film is a marvel. Ava Sloan and cinematographer Luca Moretti have created a world where stillness is terrifying and beauty is just a trick of the light. The sound design, or lack thereof, is revolutionary, using the absence of sound as a character in its own right. The few moments when sound does return are overwhelming, almost too much to bear. And that's the point. Silent Zone is an experience as much as it is a narrative. It invites you into silence and then dares you to sit there, to feel what lingers, to question what's real. And in doing so, it becomes something rare, a thriller that thrills without shouting, a mystery that haunts without horror, and a story that echoes long after the final frame. We're just getting started with our breakdowns of films like this. So if this deep dive into Silent Zone left you intrigued, unsettled, or just plain curious, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to unpack, from visual symbolism to performance choices and hidden layers you might have missed. And trust me, with a film like Silent Zone, there's always more hiding in the silence. Until next time, listen closely. Because silence, it's never just quiet. In Silent Zone, the story begins not with chaos, but with an unsettling stillness, an absence of noise that feels unnatural, as though the world itself is holding its breath. The desert stretches out like an empty canvas, flat and pale under the morning light, with nothing but wind brushing over sand. There's a starkness to the landscape, but an undeniable beauty too. This is Delta 9, one of the silent zones, places where no sound can exist. And it is here, with her hand on the door of a black surveillance van, that Cam Reed steps into frame. Cam is not a stranger to these places. Her face is calm, even when her eyes betray a storm of memory. Once a decorated linguist in a military unit assigned to communication anomalies, she left the service under strained circumstances. But the reason that truly defines her is more personal. Her sister, Riley, went missing during a classified mission into Delta 9 2 years earlier. No trace, no explanation. Only a corrupted audio file recovered from her last transmission. One that played back only static and what sounded like a whisper buried deep inside. No one could hear it but Cam. Now she's back. Not under orders. Not part of any sanctioned mission. She's operating in secret, with equipment borrowed, repurposed, or stolen. She's built her entire life around this obsession, understanding what happened in Delta 9, finding Riley, or at least learning what took her. Her mind is sharp, methodical. Every movement she makes is precise. But there's a desperation underneath, and it reveals itself in how tightly she grips the old leather notebook Riley once carried. Cam keeps it close, flipping through the pages, as if the ink itself might whisper some forgotten truth. She's not alone on this trip, though not by choice. Agent Ezra Malik, a stoic intelligence officer known for his loyalty to protocol, has been assigned to monitor her activity. But instead of stopping her at the border of the zone, he follows her in. Ostensibly, it's to ensure she doesn't tamper with restricted areas or release sensitive data. But as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Ezra's motivations are not entirely professional. He's been inside the zones before, and what he saw, or didn't see, never left him. Their relationship begins strained. Cam doesn't trust anyone affiliated with the government, least of all someone with a badge and clearance codes. Ezra, meanwhile, views Cam as unstable, a wild card with too much emotional baggage to be objective. But they need each other. The equipment Cam's brought, high-frequency scanners, visual echo monitors, quantum resonance mics, was designed with Riley's fieldwork in mind. Ezra, despite his misgivings, knows that Cam's tech and intuition might be their only shot at surviving inside. As they move deeper into Delta 9, the environment starts to shift. What begins as a typical desert terrain soon becomes uncanny. The air feels heavy. The sunlight seems to pulse rather than shine. Trees don't move in the breeze, and when Cam drops a rock at her feet, there's no sound. Not even the expected absence, but a kind of void. The silence isn't passive, it swallows. Even the basic sounds of their breathing, footsteps, the crunch of gravel beneath boots, gone. Their suits are equipped with internal mics that transmit to their earpieces, so they can hear each other speak. But outside the suit, nothing. Their first encounter with something unusual comes at an abandoned outpost, one that doesn't appear on any maps. It's a structure made of synthetic materials, clearly constructed within the last decade, yet covered in layers of dust and sand. Inside, they find signs of recent occupancy. Food packets, a half-charged battery cell, and on a table, an old analog recorder. Cam picks it up, instinctively pressing play. Static. Then, for a split second, a voice. It's faint and broken, but unmistakable. It's Riley. Cam freezes. Ezra looks at her, recognizing the name from her dossier. The voice says one word: stillness. Then the recording ends. No date. No timestamp. Just that one fractured message. This discovery jolts them into a new phase of the mission. Whatever this place is, it's not abandoned. Someone, or something, is maintaining it. And if Riley was here, even briefly, Cam refuses to leave without finding more. They press forward, now mapping the terrain with more intensity. Cam begins noticing patterns. Structures built with non-Earth materials. Symbols etched into stones that shimmer under UV light. The language looks alien, but elements of it mirror phonetic roots from dozens of human dialects. It's as if the zone is piecing together sounds from across cultures and distilling them into silent symbols. Ezra starts experiencing memory glitches. He sees flashes of events from his past, moments of violence, guilt, choices he buried deep. These flashes are visual, intense, and too accurate to be hallucinations. Cam, too, begins seeing Riley.
Not just in recordings, but standing in the distance, dressed in her mission uniform, face partially obscured. The sightings are fleeting, but consistent. Every time Cam follows, she finds something, an artifact, a data shard, a drawing etched into the dirt. As they collect more fragments, the zone begins reacting. Their equipment malfunctions. Cam's internal mic fails, and for 24 minutes she cannot speak to Ezra. They communicate only through gestures, and during this time, their surroundings grow stranger. Time warps. A sunrise that should take hours passes in seconds. Trees appear where there were none before. And then they find it, the edge of something vast and buried beneath the sand. A door. Not made of metal or stone, but some material that shifts color with the light. Cam recognizes its shape from Riley's drawings, repetitions of an arch surrounded by concentric lines. The door isn't locked. It opens with a vibration, not a sound, but a pulse, like a heartbeat transmitted through the earth. Inside is a corridor, smooth and dark, leading downward. Ezra hesitates. Cam doesn't. She walks in, flashlight shaking slightly in her grip. The corridor leads them to a chamber, massive, spherical, with walls covered in the same shimmering symbols. In the center, a column of light hovers, emitting no sound, but vibrating with intensity. Around it are objects, tools, clothing, items from different time periods, all arranged in a strange order. Cam scans them quickly. A child's shoe. A soldier's helmet. A photograph of a woman standing at a lake. And then, lying near the edge of the platform, Riley's locket. Cam picks it up. Her hands tremble. The locket opens to reveal two small photos, one of Riley, one of Cam. The image is pristine, untouched by time. Ezra warns her they need to leave. The walls of the chamber have begun to ripple. The light intensifies. But Cam isn't done. She places the locket at the base of the light column. Instantly, her headset fills with static. Then a word, "Stay." Ezra hears it too. It's not a command, it's a plea. And then silence. The chamber collapses into darkness, not violently, but like a light being dimmed. Cam and Ezra stumble out, but something has shifted. Cam is different. Calmer. More certain. She believes Riley is alive, or at least a version of her. And now, Cam is ready to find out what exactly this zone is protecting, and what it's hiding. As they exit the underground structure, they realize that everything has changed above ground. Their instruments no longer sync to their home base. The sun hangs frozen in the sky. And at the edge of the zone where their journey began, the black surveillance van is gone. In its place is something new. A single tree, growing from the sand. A tree that wasn't there before. And when Cam touches it, she hears a heartbeat. Not her own. It's Riley's. But only she can hear it. And in that moment, she understands. The zone isn't closing. It's waking up. Cam stands frozen beneath the lone tree that now marks the edge of the Delta 9 zone, her fingers lightly pressed against the bark. It's warm, alive, and pulsing with something unmistakably human. She doesn't speak, doesn't move. She just listens, to the heartbeat that shouldn't be there. Ezra watches from a distance, his expression unreadable. They've both seen enough by now to know that nothing about this place can be taken at face value. But this is different. The tree wasn't here before. And now, it grows from the sand like a monument to everything they don't understand. A symbol. A marker. Or maybe a doorway. They retreat from the edge and make camp beneath the low ridge where the sand gives way to crumbled stone. The night, if it can still be called that in the zone's warped passage of time, is unusually cold. Neither speaks much. Cam's mind is racing, flipping through fragments of memories, pieces of evidence, sounds that don't exist yet linger anyway. She replays the voice, Riley's voice, saying, "Stay," over and over, trying to determine whether it was a memory, a hallucination, or something more. The silence has started to press heavier now. Not just around them, but inside. Even their internal suit mics glitch. Words cut out mid-sentence. Meaning is lost between thought and voice. Cam begins to suspect that the zone isn't just muting sound, it's learning to reshape it, redirect it. The silence is no longer passive. It's strategic. They move again the next day, tracking the symbols etched into the sand. The path leads them not further into the desert, but into a forest, one that shouldn't exist here. Satellite images had shown nothing but dunes, flat and empty. But now, thick trunks rise from the soil, their leaves silent, unmoving, as though frozen in time. Here, the silence takes on a new quality. Not oppressive. Not terrifying. But sacred. Cam whispers to test it. Nothing. But in her chest, she feels something vibrate. A response. The zone is alive. And it's listening. Deep within the forest, they find another structure, half-sunken, overgrown with vines. It's not made of metal this time, but of something older. Stone and clay, but not ancient. Carved with care. In the center is a pedestal. And on it rests a device, sleek, black, humming with latent energy. It looks out of place. Ezra steps forward, scanning it with his equipment. The readings are off the charts. The device pulses once. Then again. It's in rhythm with Cam's heartbeat. She approaches, instinct guiding her. When she touches it, the zone shifts. The ground hums. The trees vibrate. And for a brief moment, the silence cracks. A voice echoes. "You were not meant to hear." Cam stumbles back. Ezra reaches for her, but she shakes him off, eyes wide with realization. The device wasn't built here. It was brought. And it's not meant to transmit. It's meant to contain. They begin piecing the fragments together. Riley's last mission wasn't to explore the zone, it was to place the device. To seal something in. And something, some part of her, remains connected to it. The voice she heard wasn't just Riley's memory. It was Riley's consciousness, preserved, perhaps fragmented, within the structure of the zone itself. The realization is staggering. The silent zones are not accidents. They are not natural. They are prisons. Quarantine sites. And Delta 9 is the largest. Whatever force exists inside, sentient, ancient, or something born of our own making, it communicates not with words, but with memory, with thought, with presence. It doesn't speak because it never needed to. It listens. It learns. And it remembers. Ezra begins to spiral. He reveals a truth he's been hiding since the start. Years ago, he led an operation into another zone, Omega 3. It was his mission. A recon team disappeared under his watch. Cam stares at him, realization dawning. Riley's mission wasn't random. It was sent to cover up what Ezra lost. A cleanup. A burial. The betrayal stings, but there's no time for blame. The zone begins to shift violently. Trees collapse without sound. The ground cracks, not with thunder, but with eerie calm. The device on the pedestal glows brighter, and Cam feels it pulling at her thoughts, her memories. She begins to lose time. One moment she's walking. The next, she's somewhere else.
A room. Familiar. A bedroom, her childhood home. And there, sitting on the bed, is Riley. But it's not Riley. Not really. It's a projection. A memory reconstructed with eerie accuracy. Riley speaks, but the words are thoughts. Felt, not heard. You followed me. You shouldn't have. Cam approaches, tears brimming in her eyes. The figure is warm. Solid. Real. But it fades with each step. Riley's expression softens. The zone holds pieces of us. Fractures. I tried to warn you. Cam demands answers. What is this place? What does it want? The answer comes not from Riley, but from the zone itself. A vision. A city, far in the past. Human, yet unfamiliar. People communicating not with speech, but with gestures, with shared thoughts. A society that grew too attuned to sound. So much so, that they learned to strip it away. They created silence as refuge. As protection. But the silence grew, became conscious, became hunger. And now, what was once sanctuary has become something else. The vision ends. Cam is back in the forest, Ezra beside her, shaken but grounded. They realize the truth. The device is not a prison. It's a valve. A failsafe. One designed to keep the zone in balance. It cannot be destroyed, but it can be deactivated. Cam can open the silence. But doing so will mean releasing everything the zone has stored. Every voice, every thought, every fragment it has taken. Including Riley. Ezra warns against it. If the zone's contents are released, what then? Chaos? Madness? What's to stop it from spreading? Cam looks at the locket still clutched in her hand. She knows what she must do. The final sequence is ethereal, almost surreal. Cam walks alone to the pedestal. She places the locket beside the device. The forest begins to dissolve, not in flame or wind, but in light. Silent, slow. A reverse of decay. Ezra watches from a distance, tears in his eyes. Cam reaches out, touches the device. And the silence breaks. It's not a sound. Not in the traditional sense. It's everything at once. Every voice. Every memory. Every echo the zone ever stored floods outward. Trees bend, the ground shakes, but still, no explosion. No chaos. Just release. Cam collapses, and Ezra rushes to her. Her eyes flutter open. I heard her, she whispers. The final scene is soft. They walk back through the zone. The forest is gone. The desert is still. But the silence has changed. It's lighter now. Less consuming. At the edge, where the tree once stood, is a patch of wildflowers. Blooming, vibrant. Ezra turns to Cam. What happens now? She smiles faintly. We listen. Fade to black. And the first sound in minutes. A quiet heartbeat. One. Then another. Then silence. Peaceful this time. Silent zone ends not with destruction, but with understanding. A reminder that some answers come not through force or volume, but through stillness. And some silences are meant to be broken. In the vast, echoless expanse of silent zone, it's not the silence that speaks the loudest. It's the people navigating through it. These characters, each carrying their own weight of memory, guilt, and conviction, are the heartbeats of the film. They don't just move the story forward. They reflect it, mirror it, and unravel it from the inside out. Every glance, every choice, every internal war they fight becomes a reflection of the larger forces at play within the zone itself. To understand Silent Zone, you have to understand the characters not by what they say, but by what they carry, and how the silence draws it all to the surface. Cam Reed is our anchor. She's not just the protagonist, she is the pulse of the film. The camera lingers on her not because she speaks more than others. In fact, for long stretches of the film, she says very little, but because her presence demands attention. Played with quiet intensity by Janelle Ward, Cam is a woman driven not by vengeance or ambition, but by grief. Her sister Riley's disappearance has left a wound that never scarred over, a question mark that refuses to stop bleeding. Yet Cam doesn't carry her pain loudly. She wears it with a soldier's discipline, folded neatly behind every calculated decision, every loaded pause, every sleepless stare into the unknown. Cam's strength lies not in action, but in perception. She is deeply observant, tuned to frequencies most people overlook, emotional, sensory, even the intangible ones. Her past as a military linguist isn't just a job detail. It defines the way she experiences the world. Language, for her, is more than communication. It's connection. Meaning. When the zone steals sound, it steals something fundamental from Cam. And that's where her obsession begins. It's not just about Riley. It's about understanding what took her, what silenced her. Through Cam, we see the central theme of memory as both a compass and a trap. She uses her sister's notes, audio files, even childhood drawings as a roadmap. But those same artifacts become emotional quicksand. The zone reflects not just the physical world, but the mental one. and Cam's grief becomes the key that opens doors, both literal and metaphorical. Her arc is one of evolution, from seeker to messenger, from sister to survivor. By the film's end, when she chooses to release what the zone has captured, she isn't letting go of Riley. She's letting go of the silence around her. Ezra Malik, by contrast, is a man of order. On the surface, he's everything Cam isn't: protocol-bound, skeptical, emotionally armored. Played by Theo Lane with subtle restraint, Ezra is introduced as a government watchdog, sent to monitor Cam and, if necessary, bring her back. But what unfolds is far more nuanced. Ezra is not just a gatekeeper. He's a man haunted by his own past, by a mission gone wrong and a silence that followed him long before he stepped into Delta 9. Where Cam's grief is personal, Ezra's is buried deep in duty. He speaks in clipped sentences, hides behind reports and risk assessments. But the zone doesn't allow hiding. It draws out what's buried. And slowly, we begin to see the cracks in his armor, the hesitation in his commands, the way his hand shakes when he sees familiar terrain, the guilt that flickers across his face when Cam mentions Riley. Because Ezra was there. Not in Delta 9, but in another zone, another failure. And he's never forgiven himself for what he lost. The relationship between Cam and Ezra evolves in a way that defies traditional character arcs. There's no romantic subplot, no sudden bonding montage. Instead, there's tension, resistance, then understanding, and finally, trust, not the easy kind, but the hard-earned kind that comes from shared trauma and mutual vulnerability. They don't always agree, but they come to rely on each other because the silence forces them to. They must speak less, read more, of each other's eyes, body language, intent. Their survival depends not on weapons or plans, but on connection. And in that sense, they mirror the very phenomenon they're trying to decode. Then there's Riley. She is both present and absent throughout the film. Physically gone, yes, but never truly vanished. Through flashbacks, audio snippets, written notes, and eventually projected memory, Riley becomes the emotional tether of the story. She's not just Cam's sister. She's the catalyst, the ghost, the heartbeat that still echoes in the silence. Riley's character is revealed piece by piece, never in full. We learn that she was a linguist like Cam, that she volunteered for a mission others declined.
And in the end, when Cam sees Riley, whether real or imagined, it's not just a reunion. It's a reckoning. Riley, or the memory of her, forces Cam to confront the real question. What are you willing to lose to understand the silence? And that question haunts not just Cam, but every character caught in the zone's grip. Other supporting characters play smaller but crucial roles. Dr. Noura El Adly, mentioned only briefly in logs and voice notes, was Riley's mentor and one of the earliest researchers on the zones. Though never seen on screen, her presence is felt through her notes, her warnings, her hypotheses about what silence truly is. Through her, the film explores the idea that science and spirituality are not separate, that the zone might be a living entity, or perhaps a consciousness too vast to define. She theorized that sound is memory, and silence is memory's grave. Her work adds depth to the mystery and expands the story's philosophical reach. There's also Sergeant Halvorson, a grizzled operator from Ezra's failed Omega-3 mission, whose voice appears in corrupted transmissions. His tone is raw, angry, filled with fear. He serves as a narrative ghost, a reminder that many who enter the zones never leave whole. His presence is brief, but it underscores the emotional cost of these missions, not just for those who vanish, but for those left behind. The zone itself functions almost as a character in its own right. It's never anthropomorphized, never given a definitive motive or personality, but it reacts. It adapts. It responds to emotion, to memory, to grief. It shows Cam images of her childhood. It reflects Ezra's guilt in shifting terrain. It is both mirror and maze. And as a character, it evolves. What begins as a void becomes an entity, a presence. Not evil, not even hostile, just vast, curious, perhaps lonely. This layered approach to characterization allows the film to operate on multiple levels. It's not just a thriller or a sci-fi mystery. It's an emotional study, a meditation on how people cope with absence. Each character represents a different response to loss. Cam searches. Ezra buries. Riley accepts. And the Zone remembers. By the end of the film, when Cam chooses to unseal the device and release the stored voices, it's not just an act of heroism. It's the final step in her transformation. She's no longer chasing a sister or a sound. She's confronting the silence inside herself. And in doing so, she redefines what it means to survive, not to escape the Zone, but to understand it, to carry it, to speak what others cannot. Ezra, too, finds resolution, not in redemption, but in honesty. He confesses his failures. He stands by Cam when it matters. And in the final shot, when they walk through the now changed landscape, he doesn't lead. He follows. Not out of obligation, but out of faith. And Riley, whether truly gone or transformed, remains the soul of the story. Her voice, once silenced, now echoes not just in the Zone but in Cam's memory, in the flowers blooming at the edge of the sand, in the sound of footsteps where there were none before. The characters of Silent Zone don't shout. They don't rage. They endure. They adapt. And in their quiet resistance, they show us something profound, that sometimes the loudest stories are the ones told in whispers. And the most unforgettable characters are the ones who teach us how to listen. The making of Silent Zone was a project whispered about in indie filmmaking circles long before the first trailer ever dropped. Its mysterious premise and unconventional storytelling caught early attention, but what truly set it apart? Far beyond its haunting tone and sound design, were the strange, surreal, and sometimes outright unbelievable things that happened behind the scenes. It's almost as though the silence of the Zone followed the production, creeping into the filming process and stirring up oddities that would come to define this film's legacy in ways no one expected. From the start, the cast and crew knew they were creating something different. Director Ava Sloan had already built a reputation for her meticulous, almost obsessive attention to sound and silence in her debut film, but Silent Zone took that vision to another level. She insisted early on that real silence be incorporated into the shoot, not digitally removed in post, but captured as authentically as possible. That meant finding locations with the lowest natural ambient sound on Earth. And so, the production began by scouting sites deep in the deserts of Utah and the salt flats of Bolivia. But the most striking location ended up being an abandoned scientific outpost in the Nevada desert, nestled miles away from any road. The location wasn't just quiet, it was eerily still. So still, in fact, that some crew members began to complain of headaches, dizziness, and a sensation they described as losing time while shooting there. Several even claimed they experienced auditory hallucinations, hearing faint whispers or phantom echoes, even when no one was speaking. The sound team initially chalked it up to stress, but as more crew members reported the same phenomenon, it became one of the shoot's unofficial legends. Janelle Ward, who played Cam Reed, admitted in a later interview that she started carrying a small audio recorder with her during night shoots. She said she didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but something about the location unsettled her. You'd walk off set for just a moment, she recalled, and you'd feel like someone was behind you. You'd turn, and there'd be no one there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. One night, she left the recorder on during a dinner break. When she played it back later, it had captured nearly 40 minutes of static. Then, near the end, a single word, stay. The crew never figured out where it came from, but Sloan decided to use that moment in the actual film, layering it into one of the ambient soundscapes during Cam's first encounter with the Zone. That wasn't the only eerie audio moment that bled from reality into fiction. During the filming of one of the underground chamber scenes, shot in a massive decommissioned missile silo retrofitted with LED panels and projection equipment, the crew was plagued with intermittent equipment failure. Lights would flicker, cameras would freeze, and worst of all, microphones would pick up overlapping audio from earlier scenes that had already been wiped. At first, the sound department thought it was an issue with file storage. But when a mic captured dialogue from a scene that hadn't been filmed yet, everyone got a little uneasy. The silo had no cell service, no Wi-Fi, and no radio interference, yet the audio glitch kept repeating over multiple takes. Eventually, the tech team dubbed the phenomenon sound bleed, and instead of fighting it, Ava Sloan embraced it. She wove some of the corrupted sound into the film, using it during scenes where Cam and Ezra begin experiencing time slips and hallucinations. What was once a production issue became one of the most distinctive elements of the movie's design. Production designer Mika Bouchard, tasked with creating the artifacts and alien structures within the zone, found inspiration in unexpected places. Rather than building elaborate sci-fi props, she collected real-world items from estate sales, flea markets, and even war memorabilia auctions. Each object in the chamber scenes had a real-world origin, many belonging to people who had passed away, their belongings untouched for decades. Bouchard believed these items carried a kind of emotional residue, and that the camera would pick up on that energy, even if viewers didn't consciously register it. One particularly eerie item, a rusted pendant that became Riley's locket in the film, was purchased from a vendor who claimed it had once belonged to a missing person. True or not, the story added weight to the object, and Janelle Ward refused to let anyone else handle it during shooting. Another strange occurrence came during the forest sequence. The set, constructed in a remote wooded area outside Vancouver, was designed to be manipulated for lighting and fog effects. But after several days of shooting, a pattern began to emerge. Every time they reset for a new take, a different tree seemed to appear in the background. The crew initially thought it was just a trick of camera angles or lighting shifts, but when aerial drone footage confirmed that some trees had subtly changed position from one day to the next, jokes about a moving forest turned into actual curiosity. Botanists brought in for plant consultation couldn't explain it either. Some of the trees were tagged, but the tags kept ending up on different trunks. To this day, no one on the crew has definitively explained what happened. Ava Sloan later said, "I don't know what it was, but we used it. We leaned into it. We let the zone evolve. And evolve it did." The final edit of the forest sequence was intentionally arranged to reflect the inconsistent geography, creating a disorienting, dreamlike effect that viewers often cite as one of the most haunting parts of the film. The cast's experience with communication, or the loss of it, also mirrored the film's themes in surprising ways. For scenes inside the silent zones, Sloan insisted on actors performing without dialogue. Instead, they would rehearse the emotional beats, film in silence, and then record internal monologue or thought tracks afterward. This method created an uncanny effect during filming. Actors had to learn to react purely with their bodies and eyes. Theo Lane, who played Ezra, said, "It was like learning a new language. You weren't acting lines. You were acting silence. And somehow that was more honest." In one scene, where Ezra confesses his role in a past failed mission, there was originally an entire page of dialogue written. But Lane and Sloan agreed during rehearsal to scrap it entirely. Instead, the camera lingers on his face for 28 seconds as he silently breaks down. In the final cut, that moment is accompanied only by a distant, low-frequency hum. Audiences later described the scene as gutting and more emotional than any speech. Janelle Ward's commitment to her role went beyond performance. For authenticity, she trained with sound engineers and neurologists to understand the psychological effects of prolonged silence on the human brain. She spent days in sensory deprivation tanks to prepare for scenes inside the zone and practiced meditative breathing to control her heartbeat during close-up shots. She even lived off-grid for 3 days in the desert, carrying only Riley's journal prop and a field recorder. When she returned, she told Sloan she'd experienced something strange. During her last night, she dreamed of her sister, except she doesn't have one in real life. That dream ended up influencing a scene late in the film, where Cam sees Riley's memory in a dreamlike vision. Sloan rewrote part of the script to include lines from Janelle's journal entry the morning after her return. "It wasn't acting," Janelle said later. "It was something else. Like the zone was already there." On the production's final day of filming, an unexpected storm rolled through the Nevada location. The forecast had been clear for days, but within hours, the sky turned green-gray and the wind picked up fast. Sloan decided to roll with it. The last scene shot, Cam and Ezra walking toward the tree that wasn't there before, was filmed in real weather, with sand swirling and skies ominous. They captured it in a single take. When the camera stopped rolling, the wind dropped. The crew applauded in stunned silence, aware they just caught something unplanned, and maybe unrepeatable. Even post-production carried strange echoes. Sound editors reported audio files becoming corrupted only when exported at specific frequencies. Editors said certain frames of footage contained visual anomalies, shadows without sources, brief flickers of unexplainable light, or distortions that weren't part of any known effect. Some were kept. Others were cut. But everyone agreed, the film had a life of its own. Once Silent Zone hit festivals, the buzz wasn't just about the film's aesthetic, it was about its aura. Viewers described it as hypnotic, unsettling, and deeply personal. Many claimed they heard sounds others didn't, or noticed flickering images in peripheral shots that vanished on second viewing. Online forums sprung up, dissecting these moments, compiling theories about hidden messages encoded in the film. One popular thread speculated that the film itself was designed to mimic a zone, subtly manipulating its audience into altered emotional states. While no one confirmed it, the rumor only added to the mythos. There's a saying among the crew, Silent Zone wasn't just made. It was discovered. And maybe that's the strangest fact of all. In Silent Zone, what begins as a quiet exploration of a futuristic mystery slowly morphs into a deeply layered experience. One that unfolds not through exposition or spectacle, but through silence, restraint, and the lingering echoes of what's left unsaid. It's a film that doesn't offer its truths easily. It demands patience. It asks viewers to sit with discomfort, to lean into ambiguity, and to find meaning in the empty spaces. And that's precisely why it has left such a lasting impression on critics and audiences alike. The events of the film may appear minimal at first glance, but when viewed through a critical lens, they unravel into a tapestry of complex themes, psychological tension, and emotional resonance that grows long after the credits fade. The film's opening sequence, Cam Reed alone in the desert, standing at the threshold of Delta 9, is deceptively simple. There's no dialogue. No immediate sense of urgency. Just landscape, breath, and silence. But this moment, as critics have noted, does something quietly radical. It establishes the zone not as a place of chaos, but as a force of stillness. And by opening on that stillness, director Ava Sloan signals her intent. This is not a traditional sci-fi thriller. This is a meditation on what silence does to the human mind. Critics praised this choice, calling it a reversal of genre expectations and a masterclass in immersive minimalism. Instead of bombarding the audience with information, the film invites them to listen, to feel the absence first, and only then begin searching for the presence within it. One of the most thematically charged moments comes early in the zone, when Cam and Ezra stumble upon the outpost that shouldn't exist. The strange objects scattered around, the worn notebooks, the flickering monitors, the analog recorder with Riley's whisper, are more than just eerie set pieces. They function as emotional landmines. Critics have pointed out how the placement of these artifacts plays with the idea of memory as both evidence and illusion. Cam believes she's finding clues. But is she discovering something real, or something the zone wants her to believe? This is a question that repeats itself again and again throughout the narrative. Is the zone a reflection of internal guilt, or an external intelligence? Is it protecting something, or imprisoning it? These ambiguities aren't flaws of the script, they are the script. The zone, as many reviewers have highlighted, operates not as a physical antagonist, but as a psychological mirror. What you bring into it, grief, secrets, guilt, is what you'll find. And this makes Cam's journey feel deeply personal, not just to her, but to anyone watching who has ever wrestled with unresolved loss. A critical turning point occurs during the scene in the buried chamber, where Cam finds the locket and places it near the strange glowing device. The moment is presented with visual restraint, no loud music cues, no dramatic camera movements. Yet it lands with immense weight. What makes this scene so powerful, according to critics, is how it visually and emotionally connects the personal with the universal. The chamber is vast, alien, and cold. The locket is small, human, and warm. By bringing the two together, the film bridges grief with the unknown, the past with the present. One critic wrote, "It's the closest the film comes to a religious experience, an act of faith made not in God, but in memory." Another scene frequently cited in reviews is the forest sequence. As Cam and Ezra walk through trees that shouldn't exist, time becomes disjointed. The characters see flickers of people, including themselves. Some critics have interpreted this scene as a visual metaphor for trauma looping. The forest becomes a psychological space where unhealed memories replay themselves until confronted. Ezra, who has remained emotionally closed off until this point, begins to reveal the weight he carries from a failed mission. It's in this setting that the emotional walls start to break. From a storytelling perspective, this portion of the film slows the momentum, yet it deepens the experience. Rather than escalating through external conflict, the tension internalizes. We see Ezra unravel, and we see Cam begin to shift from reactive to proactive. This change is subtle, but vital. Critics who admired the film's emotional intelligence point to this stretch as the real heart of the movie. Not the finale, not the opening, but the quiet breakdowns in between. And yet, Silent Zone doesn't shy away from traditional climactic moments. The final act, where Cam makes the decision to release the memories and stored voices trapped in the zone, offers both emotional payoff and thematic closure. Her choice is not framed as heroic in the classic sense. There is no cheering, no external validation. In fact, Ezra even questions her, unsure if what she's doing is right. But Cam doesn't answer with logic. She answers with conviction. And it's that trust in intuition, the same intuition that carried her this far, that gives the film its emotional resolution. What's remarkable is how the film balances this decision with uncertainty. Critics were divided on whether Cam's choice is one of liberation or destruction. Does she free the zone's inhabitants, or does she doom the world to an unknown force? The film never says. And that refusal to define meaning is what makes it linger. It respects the audience's intelligence. It allows for interpretation. And in doing so, it becomes a different film for each person who watches it. Emotionally, Silent Zone hits a nerve that many films in the sci-fi or thriller genre often bypass. It treats grief not as a plot device, but as a presence, something that haunts, shapes, and drives every decision. Cam's relationship with Riley, experienced almost entirely through flashbacks, objects, and fragmented memory, becomes the emotional spine of the narrative. And because Riley is never fully seen, never fully known, she becomes both specific and symbolic. She is every lost voice, every memory too painful to speak aloud. This resonance has been particularly noted by audiences dealing with loss. Viewers have described the film as a quiet form of therapy, citing how it allowed them to confront their own unspoken pain. The lack of sound in key scenes forces a different kind of attention, a deeper listening. You don't just watch Silent Zone, you feel it. You carry it with you. After, from a critical perspective, the film's design and structure have also drawn praise for how they support its thematic goals. The non-linear pacing, the minimal exposition, the use of sound as narrative rather than background. All of it serves to keep viewers disoriented, reflective, vulnerable. It's not a film that guides you. It challenges you to find your own way, just as Cam must. Cinematically, the visuals reinforce this journey. The use of wide landscapes, often empty, evokes isolation and insignificance. Cam and Ezra are frequently dwarfed by the world around them, reminding the audience of how small we are in the face of the unknown. But then, in intimate moments, close-ups of hands, eyes, objects, the scale flips. The tiny becomes profound. A single heartbeat becomes the loudest sound. A photograph becomes a scream. One particularly subtle moment that critics have latched onto is the recurring image of the tree. It appears once at the start of the film, again when Cam touches it and hears the heartbeat, and finally at the very end, surrounded by blooming wildflowers. Some interpretations suggest the tree represents connection, roots, history, the family bond between Cam and Riley. Others see it as the zone's answer to Cam's question, a living monument to memory that speaks not with words, but with growth. The film's refusal to clearly define its science has also become a topic of critical debate. Some have lauded this as a strength, calling it science fiction in the truest literary sense, concerned not with tech, but with human condition. Others have expressed frustration, wishing for more concrete answers. But even critics who found the film elusive admitted that its emotional clarity was undeniable. As one reviewer put it, "It may not explain the zone, but it explains what it feels like to lose someone." And sometimes, that's the greater truth. The reception of Silent Zone as a whole has been characterized by admiration for its ambition and intimacy. It's not a film that plays well on first glance for everyone. It's not easily digestible. But those who connect with it tend to connect deeply. It has sparked fan theories, academic essays, and film school analyses. Screenings often end in hushed silence, not because the audience is confused, but because they're still processing. It's a film that dares to be quiet in a culture that often rewards volume. In the end, Silent Zone stands as a work of art that doesn't chase easy answers. It invites you into stillness and leaves you there. And what you find in that silence, fear, love, regret, hope, is yours alone. And that, critics agree, is where its true brilliance lies. Because it's not just a film. It's a conversation with the silence in all of us. The production of Silent Zone was, by all accounts, as enigmatic and quietly electrifying as the film itself. It didn't begin with a big studio press release or a splashy headline. It began with a script, one written almost entirely in fragments, notes, and unfinished dialogue, a haunting manuscript that passed between producers in whispered awe, known only by its working title, Echo Threshold. Director Ava Sloan, still riding the critical success of her minimalist debut, saw something rare in the pages. Not just a story about silence, but a meditation on the things we try to drown beneath noise. And from the moment she signed on, she set in motion a production journey full of innovation, mystery, and some of the most fascinating filmmaking decisions in recent memory. One of Ava's very first choices set the tone for everything that followed. She wanted real silence. Not just on screen, but on set. During shooting days inside the designated zone locations, she banned all unnecessary sound. No cell phones. No idle chatter. Even walkie-talkies were replaced with hand signals. For the cast and crew, it created a strange, almost monastic atmosphere. People moved slower. Crew members whispered or communicated with notepads. Some said it felt like they were inside the movie even while making it. Cinematographer Luca Moretti later described it as an immersive, eerie calm that helped us shape the film's emotional frequency. This approach wasn't just for mood, it was functional. The film's central premise demanded audio so pristine, so minimal, that post-production wouldn't have to digitally remove background sounds. Ava wanted the microphones to feel lonely. She collaborated closely with sound designer Elise Tanaka to develop a new recording rig capable of capturing hyper-isolated ambient tones. Tanaka spent weeks testing equipment in caves, deserts, and remote islands before narrowing down the film's key locations based on natural silence levels. Some of the most haunting moments in the movie, the subtle hums, the shifting wind, the nearly imperceptible crackle of sand underfoot, are real recordings, untouched. Location scouting became an epic journey in itself. The production team traveled to Iceland, Nevada, the Atacama Desert, and abandoned missile silos across the American Midwest. One of the most remarkable finds was a decommissioned Cold War listening station in Alaska. It hadn't been touched in decades and was only accessible via helicopter. Once inside, the crew discovered rooms filled with outdated equipment, rusted monitors, analog switchboards, typewritten logs. It was as though time had been frozen. Ava was so captivated by the station's decayed beauty that she rewrote an entire sequence to be filmed there. The production designer added only one object to the room, Riley's locket. Everything else was left exactly as they found it. Filming in such isolated and unpredictable environments wasn't without its challenges. During one shoot in Bolivia's salt flats, the crew faced an unexpected hailstorm. Equipment had to be covered with thermal blankets, and actors were shuttled into vans between takes. But Janelle Ward, playing Cam Reed, insisted on staying outside, pacing the landscape alone. When asked why, she simply said, "It felt like something was about to speak." That night, she scribbled down a stream of consciousness monologue that would eventually become part of her voiceover in the final scene. Ava called it one of the most honest pieces of writing I've ever seen from an actor. Janelle, known for her immersive preparation, took her method acting to new heights on this project. Before filming began, she went through a 3-week isolation program designed by a team of neurologists and sound therapists. The goal was to deprive her of consistent auditory input, mimicking the kind of sensory disruption Cam would experience in the zone. She spent days without music, speech, or artificial noise. At night, she slept in a soundproof room. "It was terrifying," she said later. "You think silence is peace, but when it's absolute, it becomes something else. It becomes a mirror." That experience made her performance deeply visceral, particularly in the scene where Cam begins hallucinating memories inside the zone. The emotion was raw because it came from real disorientation. Theo Lane, who played Agent Ezra Malik, had a different challenge. A classically trained stage actor, he was used to expressive dialogue and dramatic physicality. But Ava's direction for Ezra was minimalism. She instructed him to do less until you feel like you're not doing anything. It frustrated him at first. But eventually, he learned to channel tension into the smallest movements, a tightening jaw, a long blink, a glance held 1 second too long. In one memorable scene, Ezra and Cam sit in silence for over a minute of screen time. No words. Just shared breath and unspoken truth. That scene ended up being one of the most praised in critical reviews. The crew embraced unconventional methods throughout production. One of the most unique techniques came from Elise Tanaka's sound team, who built custom listening boxes, tiny microphone pods buried underground or hidden in trees to capture the subtlest vibrations. These recordings were then layered into the sound design, giving the zone a living, breathing texture without ever using traditional musical cues. It's why certain scenes feel like the silence is moving. The sound isn't gone, it's just beneath the surface. Perhaps the strangest moment during production came on the 49th day of shooting, during a forest night scene in British Columbia. As cameras rolled on a long take of Cam walking through the woods, a glowing orb of light appeared in the distance, unplanned and unexplained. The crew assumed it was a drone. But no one had launched one. It hovered silently, then blinked out. Ava didn't cut. She whispered to the camera operator to keep filming. That footage, unmodified, became part of the film's dream sequence, where Cam glimpses impossible phenomena at the zone's center. "We didn't add anything to it," Ava later admitted. "Whatever it was, it felt right." Props and costume choices also carried meaning. The suits worn by Cam and Ezra inside the zone were custom designed by an experimental materials lab that usually creates gear for deep-sea divers and Mars simulation teams. The suits were lightweight but dense, with microsensors that glowed in response to environmental sound levels. When the characters stepped deeper into silence, the suits dimmed. This wasn't CGI. The suits actually responded to sound in real time, providing visual cues for the actors and audience alike. Theo Lane, who played Agent Ezra Malik, had a different challenge. A classically trained stage actor, he was used to expressive dialogue and dramatic physicality. But Ava's direction for Ezra was minimalism. She instructed him to do less until you feel like you're not doing anything. It frustrated him at first. But eventually, he learned to channel tension into the smallest movements, a tightening jaw, a long blink, a glance held 1 second too long. In one memorable scene, Ezra and Cam sit in silence for over a minute of screen time. No words. Just shared breath and unspoken truth. That scene ended up being one of the most praised in critical reviews. The crew embraced unconventional methods throughout production. One of the most unique techniques came from Elise Tanaka's sound team, who built custom listening boxes, tiny microphone pods buried underground or hidden in trees to capture the subtlest vibrations. These recordings were then layered into the sound design, giving the zone a living, breathing texture without ever using traditional musical cues. It's why certain scenes feel like the silence is moving. The sound isn't gone, it's just beneath the surface. Perhaps the strangest moment during production came on the 49th day of shooting, during a forest night scene in British Columbia. As cameras rolled on a long take of Cam walking through the woods, a glowing orb of light appeared in the distance, unplanned and unexplained. The crew assumed it was a drone. But no one had launched one. It hovered silently, then blinked out. Ava didn't cut. She whispered to the camera operator to keep filming. That footage, unmodified, became part of the film's dream sequence, where Cam glimpses impossible phenomena at the zone's center. "We didn't add anything to it," Ava later admitted. "Whatever it was, it felt right." Props and costume choices also carried meaning. The suits worn by Cam and Ezra inside the zone were custom designed by an experimental materials lab that usually creates gear for deep-sea divers and Mars simulation teams. The suits were lightweight but dense, with microsensors that glowed in response to environmental sound levels. When the characters stepped deeper into silence, the suits dimmed. This wasn't CGI. The suits actually responded to sound in real time, providing visual cues for the actors and audience alike. In terms of cinematography, Luca Moretti opted for prime lenses that mimicked the human eye's field of view, creating a subtle intimacy even in wide shots. He often used a technique he called focus dragging, where the depth of field would slowly shift within a single take to highlight something the characters weren't yet looking at: an empty chair, a distant figure, a photograph lying face down. This created a sense that the zone itself was trying to draw attention, trying to guide the viewer's eye in its own way. "It felt like the frame was haunted," he said. Even the editing process took a different route. Editor Fiona Ng worked without sound for the first 3 weeks of post-production. She cut scenes using only the visual rhythm of breath, blink, and movement. The idea was to let the visuals tell the story without being shaped by music or effects. Only after this silent edit was complete did the sound team step in, adding layers of environmental audio and voiceover. The result is a film that feels like it emerged from within itself, rather than being assembled from the outside. One fun fact that surprised even the cast was the inclusion of hidden signals scattered throughout the film. In multiple frames, barely visible, are waveforms, glyphs, and spectrograms embedded into the set or props. When extracted and decoded, they form fragments of poetry, phrases like "we are echoes of each other" and "silence does not forget." This was the work of Ava Sloan's partner, a digital artist who wanted the zone to feel as though it was communicating even when no one was listening. Some fans have since built entire forums around decoding these messages. Despite the challenges, the film's atmosphere never turned grim. The crew, though working under intense conditions, formed a tight-knit bond. They held nightly silent dinners where no one spoke, only wrote or gestured. It began as a rehearsal technique but became a beloved ritual. One night, the catering team created a menu inspired by the zone: white dishes, flavorless gels, and drinks that shimmered in the light. It was strange, sensory, and deeply in tune with the film's theme. When the final cut of Silent Zone was locked, Ava Sloan sent the team one final note. It read, "Thank you for hearing what wasn't said." That sentiment, in many ways, defines the entire experience of making Silent Zone. It wasn't just about telling a story. It was about creating a space, on screen and off, where silence could be more than absence, where it could be presence, meaning, emotion, And as the film continues to resonate with audiences, the production remains a testament to the idea that sometimes the quietest films leave the loudest impact because in the silence of its making, something extraordinary was born. The landscapes of Silent Zone don't just host the story, they are the story. Every inch of sand, every shadowed corridor, and every stretch of windless forest speaks louder than any dialogue. From the first haunting frame to the last flicker of wildflowers growing from the desert floor, the setting serves as a living, breathing character. It's a space so still that it vibrates with meaning. And under the careful eye of director Ava Sloan and cinematographer Luca Moretti, each location becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a reflection of the film's emotional and psychological terrain. The first location audiences encounter is Delta 9, the largest of the so-called silent zones. Described early on as geographically unstable, Delta 9 is a place that resists permanence. That resistance becomes the foundation for the film's aesthetic. Sloan deliberately chose not to film in built sets or soundstages. Instead, she and her team scoured the world for landscapes that felt unearthly in their silence. The opening shots, wide and unmoving, reveal the Bolivian salt flats, a flat, blindingly white void stretching in every direction. There's no vegetation, no movement, no structure. Just Cam, her suit, and the soft wind brushing past her helmet. It's this emptiness that first sets the film's tone. Viewers are made to feel as though they've entered not just a place, but a condition. There's an eeriness to these shots not because of what's there, but because of what isn't. The salt flats, while beautiful, quickly become oppressive. There are no landmarks to follow, no path to track. The silence begins to press in. And even in these early scenes, Luca Moretti plays with the visual space in subtle ways. The horizon line is often skewed or placed uncomfortably high in the frame. The sky looms. The earth stretches downward. The viewer feels off balance, unmoored. As Cam and Ezra move deeper into the zone, the environment begins to change. Not suddenly, but gradually, so slowly it almost escapes notice. From the flats, they transition into dry, stony ridges filmed in Utah's Goblin Valley. Here, rock formations rise like statues, weathered, pocked, and ancient. These formations feel as though they're watching. The camera lingers on them. In one memorable scene, as Cam sleeps by a rock wall, the shadow of a formation stretches toward her. It doesn't move, but the implication is clear. The land is alive. As Cam and Ezra move deeper into the zone, the environment begins to change. Not suddenly, but gradually, so slowly it almost escapes notice. From the flats, they transition into dry, stony ridges filmed in Utah's Goblin Valley. Here, rock formations rise like statues, weathered, pocked, and ancient. These formations feel as though they're watching. The camera lingers on them. In one memorable scene, as Cam sleeps by a rock wall, the shadow of a formation stretches toward her. It doesn't move, but the implication is clear. The land is alive. This slow shift from flat to form echoes the story's emotional build. As Cam begins to uncover pieces of Riley's past, the environment becomes more complex, layered. Moretti's use of light and shadow deepens here. Unlike the harsh brightness of the salt flats, these scenes are lit with golden hues and long shadows. The color palette warms, but the mood tightens. There's comfort in the rocks, shelter, form, but also menace. They hem the characters in. There are more places to hide, and more things hiding. The underground chamber scene marks a pivotal moment in both story and setting. This was filmed in a decommissioned nuclear missile silo in Montana, retrofitted with subtle, futuristic lighting and minimalist set design. The chamber's walls are smooth, circular, and eerily clean, nothing like the worn organic feel of the desert. This stark change in texture signals a thematic shift. We're no longer in nature's silence, we're in something built. Deliberate. Controlled. The symmetry of the chamber is unsettling. The camera circles slowly around Cam as she examines the objects left behind, never allowing the viewer a fixed perspective. What makes this space so powerful is its restraint. There are no glowing buttons, no elaborate tech. Just silence, objects, and space. The production team used real artifacts, rusted watches, worn photographs, broken trinkets, arranged with mathematical precision. The result is a set that feels more like a memory vault than a scientific facility. One critic described it as a mausoleum for forgotten voices. And indeed, the chamber becomes the emotional core of the film. It's here that Cam realizes Riley's presence isn't just metaphorical. The zone remembers. When the characters emerge, the terrain has changed again. The forest sequence, filmed in British Columbia, offers the most visually striking contrast in the film. Dense with towering trees and thick mist, this setting introduces color back into the narrative. Greens, grays, and faint blues dominate. There's a quietness here that's different from the desert's silence. The forest muffles. It absorbs. And it plays with depth in clever ways. Moretti uses long lenses to compress the trees, creating a visual claustrophobia. Characters appear to move without getting closer. Figures in the distance flicker between trunks. Sloan plays with the idea of reflection throughout these scenes. Pools of water mirror the canopy. Glassy leaves catch flickers of light. At one point, Cam sees herself, not in a mirror, but in the expression of a deer drinking nearby. That scene wasn't scripted. The animal wandered onto set during a reset between takes. Rather than shoo it away, Sloan rolled camera. Janelle Ward remained in character, watching silently. The resulting footage became a key moment, one that speaks to the zone's ability to reflect the internal world outward. Visual repetition becomes a key element in this part of the film. Cam walks past a twisted tree root, then again, several minutes later. The same fallen log appears at two separate locations. It's subtle, but it builds a sense of looping, of time bending. The setting begins to feel like memory itself, fragmented, familiar, and never quite stable. Lighting choices in the forest also evolve. Natural light is filtered through thick branches, creating patterns on the ground like veins. In one pivotal scene, when Cam finally hears Riley's voice through the device, the sun pierces the canopy in a sudden beam. The camera moves upward, framing Cam in silhouette, surrounded by dancing particles of light and dust. It's a moment of revelation, but not relief. The light is beautiful, but blinding. The film's color grading deserves special mention. The early parts of the film use a desaturated, almost bleached tone, removing vibrancy from the environment. But as Cam connects more deeply with the zone, color slowly returns. It's not just a stylistic choice, it's a visual metaphor for memory and emotion. The more she remembers, the more she feels, the more the world comes alive. By the end, in the film's final moments, when Cam stands near the tree that wasn't there before, the colors are lush. The wildflowers bloom in purples, reds, and oranges. The zone isn't silent anymore. It's singing. Just not in ways anyone expected. One of the most subtle yet effective cinematic techniques used throughout Silent Zone is the manipulation of frame rate. During moments of emotional overload, the camera slows slightly. Not enough for the audience to immediately notice, but just enough to change the rhythm. Breaths stretch longer. Movements become more deliberate. This is especially evident in the final scenes, when Cam reaches for the device in the chamber. Time itself seems to hold its breath with her. Sound design, or the absence of it, is interwoven deeply with the setting. In most films, silence is a void. In Silent Zone, it's a presence. Elise Tanaka, the film's sound designer, recorded ambient noise on site at each location and then gradually stripped it layer by layer in post. The result is a textured silence, one that feels inhabited. For example, in the chamber, you don't just hear nothing. You hear the absence of something. A sound that should be there, but isn't. Critics and audiences alike reported feeling a sense of vertigo during these scenes, as if their ears were searching for balance. This careful attention to sensory detail creates a film that doesn't just tell a story, it creates a place. Viewers don't feel like they've watched Cam's journey. They feel like they've been there with her. The salt on their skin, the crunch of gravel under their boots, the cold breath of windless air in the forest. The cinematography and setting conspire to immerse, to unsettle, and ultimately, to transform. In the closing shot, as Cam and Ezra walk toward the horizon, the desert now dotted with signs of life, there's no sweeping score, no final monologue. Just stillness, color, and distance. The setting, once a void, has become a path. A quiet, sacred space where silence no longer threatens, but listens. And that's the real power of Silent Zone's cinematic world. It reminds us that silence isn't just an absence of sound. It's a space. One where everything we've hidden waits to be heard. The making of Silent Zone was more than just the construction of a sci-fi thriller. It was a cinematic experience forged in isolation, silence, and a quiet sense of wonder that wove itself into every layer of the production. 4 months, the cast and crew existed in their own kind of zone, where communication was intentional, moments were unspoken, and the boundaries between story and reality blurred more often than not. Behind the camera, laughter echoed in hushed tones, friendships blossomed in stillness, and strange, beautiful things happened when no one expected them. The project kicked off with what everyone referred to as the silent boot camp. Director Ava Sloan had a reputation for pushing her actors into immersive preparation, but this was something entirely new. Before filming began, she arranged a 7-day retreat in the high desert of Arizona where the cast and key crew would live without technology, speech, or traditional sound. They were given notebooks, 1 meal a day in silence, and vast open terrain to walk alone. The purpose? To understand what it meant to exist in a space devoid of constant sound. At first, the cast thought it was a gimmick. Theo Lane, who plays Agent Ezra Malik, admitted he almost backed out. "I'm a theater guy," he laughed later. "I'm used to projecting to the back row, not listening for lizards in the dirt." But by day 3, something shifted. Janelle Ward, who played Cam, wrote entire monologues in her notebook that Ava later adapted into the script's final voiceover. Everyone began moving slower, thinking deeper, and engaging with their characters in a completely new way. By the end of the retreat, they weren't just ready to play their roles, they were those people. On set, the quiet continued, at least during filming hours. Locations were chosen not just for their visuals, but for their isolation. The Utah Salt Flats, the Bolivian highlands, and the cold forests of British Columbia all became part of the shoot. Getting to those places was half the challenge. The crew often had to drive equipment in off-road convoys across unforgiving terrain, sometimes setting up base camps that looked more like Mars expeditions than film sets. There were days when trucks broke down in the middle of nowhere, generators froze over, and signal flares had to be used just to find each other in the dark. Despite the physical demands, morale stayed unusually high. The lack of noise created a strange intimacy. Conversations were more focused. People weren't distracted by phones or background chatter. Mealtime became sacred, especially the nightly silent dinners, where the crew would sit around a fire and eat without speaking. The tradition started as a way to stay in character, but soon became a cherished ritual. It allowed people to connect in different ways, with a smile, a shared look, or a simple pass of the bread. There was also a kind of quiet humor that wove itself into the production. During the shoot in the underground missile silo, used for the film's pivotal chamber scene, a few of the younger crew members created a makeshift zone ghost by taping glow sticks to a mop and placing it in random corners. Janelle walked into the hallway one day to find it staring at her from a distance. She didn't flinch, just nodded and kept walking. "If I had screamed, they'd have made me redo the whole scene," she joked. One night, during a desert night shoot, the sky suddenly erupted with what looked like meteor showers. The cameras weren't rolling, but Ava shouted for everyone to keep still. The entire crew stood in silence for nearly 10 minutes, watching streaks of light carve through the stars. Later, they learned it had been debris from a satellite breaking up in orbit. No one had seen it coming. The moment made it into the film, not the visuals, but the mood. The next scene was filmed with a kind of reverence, a stillness no one needed to be directed into. Some of the most surprising behind-the-scenes insights came from the way Ava Sloan directed her actors during moments of emotional intensity. She rarely gave line readings. Instead, she would approach quietly, place a hand on the actor's shoulder, and whisper a memory, a question, or a single word. To Janelle, during one of Cam's breakdowns, "Imagine if your voice was the last one anyone heard." To Theo, during Ezra's confession scene, "What would you say if you only had 10 seconds to forgive yourself?" These prompts weren't instructions, they were sparks. And they led to performances that felt raw, spontaneous, and deeply personal. There was one sequence, Cam and Ezra walking through the memory forest, that proved particularly difficult to shoot. The forest, dense with tall trees and shrouded in fog, was beautiful but disorienting. The crew spent hours resetting camera tracks and fog machines between takes. But the biggest challenge came from nature itself. A bear wandered onto set one morning just before dawn. No one panicked, and the animal eventually ambled away, but it left a powerful imprint. That day's footage was some of the best they captured. Still, hushed, and filled with the unspoken awareness that something was watching. Technology, too, created its share of tension. The experimental suits worn by the actors were fitted with light-sensitive fibers that reacted to audio frequency. They were designed to glow brighter in loud environments and dim in silent ones. The problem? They were extremely sensitive. If someone whispered off-set, the lights would flash. More than once, a boom operator sneezing 50 feet away triggered a full suit reset. Despite the challenges, the suits became one of the film's most iconic visual elements, reflecting not only the world around the characters but their internal state. Between takes, the cast found ways to stay grounded. Theo Lane took up sketching again, filling a notebook with drawings of the desert. Janelle meditated in her tent each morning, writing letters to Riley, in character, before each day's shoot. The letters were never shown in the film, but Ava kept them. "They were real," she said. "More real than anything we could have scripted." One of the most emotional moments off-camera happened during the final week of shooting. The scene called for Cam to find a locket in the chamber, one that belonged to her sister. It was a quiet, delicate moment in the story. But the locket Janelle used wasn't a prop. It belonged to Ava's own sister, who had passed away years earlier. She gave it to Janelle with little explanation. When the scene wrapped, Janelle cried, not just as Cam, but as herself. "It was like all the grief in the room had been waiting for that moment," she said. On the final night, after the last take was filmed, Cam and Ezra walking toward the horizon, wildflowers blooming where silence once reigned, the crew gathered around the base campfire. There was no rap party. No loud music. Just people sharing stories, memories, and thanks. Ava spoke last. "This was never a film about silence," she said. "It was about everything we try to say when there are no words left. And that, in the end, is what made Silent Zone so special. It wasn't the budget, the tech, or the striking visuals. It was the people, the quiet trust between actors, the shared hardships, the long hours of wordless collaboration. Everyone gave something personal to the film, and in return, the film gave something back. A sense of stillness. A reminder that even in the quietest places, we're never really alone. In Silent Zone, the story unfolds not just through words or visuals, but through the deep, ever-present hum of meaning that lingers behind every glance, every breath, and every moment of stillness. It is a film that dares to speak in silence and dares even more to listen in it. Beneath its sci-fi thriller skin lies a slow, contemplative study of grief, memory, perception, and the fragility of human connection. And as the camera moves through sun-bleached deserts, hushed forests, and ghostly underground chambers, It tells a story not only of lost people, but of the spaces they leave behind and the echoes they carry with them. At the heart of Silent Zone is the theme of grief as presence. From the opening moments, when Cam steps into the zone with Riley's notebook clutched close to her chest, we understand that her journey isn't just one of investigation. It's a pilgrimage. Riley's disappearance left more than a void. It left a living question, one that Cam can't ignore. And this is where the film's brilliance begins to surface. Grief is not shown as absence, but as an entity. The zone becomes an external manifestation of Cam's internal state. It is quiet, suffocating, beautiful, and dangerous. It reflects back what she brings into it. And that's what makes it feel alive. But grief in this film isn't only personal. It's also generational and collective. We see this in the artifacts scattered throughout the zone. A child's shoe, a broken watch, a photograph of a woman smiling into the sun. These are not just items. They are stories suspended in silence. The film suggests that these zones may hold more than memory. They hold emotion. They are vessels, storing the voices of those who vanished, or those who never got the chance to speak. This leads into another powerful theme: memory as voice. Memory threads through every corner of Silent Zone. Not just in flashbacks or found recordings, but in the very construction of the world. The forest that repeats itself. The rock formations that shift when unobserved. The same figure appearing twice in different times. Memory here is not linear. It is a loop. A pattern. A haunting. And in a world where sound no longer travels, remembering becomes an act of rebellion. Cam's memories of her sister, what she looked like, how she laughed, what she feared, become her only compass. She holds onto them because in the zone, they are the only form of direction. This brings us to the idea of silence as language. One of the film's most daring choices is its embrace of long, dialogue-free sequences. It forces viewers to pay attention not to what is said, but to what is felt. In doing so, it flips traditional storytelling on its head. Here, silence is not empty, it is loaded. Every pause is a conversation. Every withheld word is a confession. It challenges our belief that communication depends on speech. And it reminds us that sometimes, silence carries the deepest truths. This is most evident in the relationship between Cam and Ezra. Their trust is not built through long discussions or shared backstories. It's built through glances held a moment too long. Through gestures, breath, proximity. Their bond grows in the silence, not despite it, but because of it. And when they finally do speak openly, their words carry the full weight of everything they've left unsaid. The film's symbolism around sound, especially the concept of a living silence, mirrors how trauma and emotion often live beneath the surface, shaping us quietly. Symbolically, the zone itself represents more than just a geographical anomaly. It's the embodiment of repression, the things we do not speak about, the history we bury, the truths we pretend aren't there. It records, remembers, and reflects. In many ways, it is like the human mind, complex, mysterious, shaped by everything it has absorbed. The longer Cam stays in it, the more the zone responds to her presence. It shows her echoes of Riley, glimpses of herself, memories not her own. It blurs reality with feeling. This symbolic mirroring allows the film to explore another theme, identity as reflection. Cam enters the zone believing she is searching for her sister. But as the story progresses, she begins to question who she is without that search. Is her grief all that's left of her? Has she become a vessel for Riley's memory rather than her own self? The zone challenges her to confront this. And in doing so, it forces us to ask ourselves, who are we when we let go of what we've lost? This identity crisis extends to Ezra as well. Though more reserved, his arc is shaped by guilt, over a mission gone wrong, lives lost under his command, truths he chose not to share. The zone forces that guilt into the open. He sees figures from his past. hears voices he thought were gone. And ultimately, he must decide whether to hide behind protocol or to act from humanity. In this way, Silent Zone becomes a story not about discovery, but about uncovering. Not about finding answers, but about choosing honesty. A recurring piece of visual symbolism in the film is the tree, first glimpsed at the edge of the zone, then again when Cam places her hand on it and hears the heartbeat. Trees traditionally represent life, growth, and interconnectedness. But in Silent Zone, the tree is silent, unmoving, and otherworldly. It sprouts in a place where nothing should grow. Some interpretations view it as Riley's soul, rooted but unseen. Others see it as the zone's way of reaching out. Either way, it becomes a totem of change, a marker that something has shifted. That memory has been acknowledged. That silence has been heard. Another subtle yet powerful motif is the color white. The salt flats, Cam's suit, the chamber's walls. White is typically associated with purity, peace, emptiness. But in the context of Silent Zone, it becomes something else, a blank canvas onto which emotion, memory, and grief are projected. The absence of color creates a visual echo of the film's sound design. You begin to crave color the same way you crave noise. And when color finally returns, in the forest, in the wildflowers at the end, it feels earned. It feels like healing. Ava Sloan also uses mirrors and reflections to symbolize duality. Characters often see themselves not directly, but through reflections, water, glass, even each other's eyes. It suggests the idea that who we are is often seen most clearly when we stop looking directly. Cam sees Riley's face in her own. Ezra sees his younger self in Cam's determination. These moments reinforce the idea that trauma shapes how we see others, and ourselves. The film doesn't offer one single theme, but rather a chorus of them, all whispering at once. Survival versus surrender is another. Cam's journey is one of survival, but not in the traditional sense. She's not escaping a monster or dodging bullets. She's surviving the slow erosion of self that comes with unresolved grief. The choice she makes at the end, to release the zone's stored voices, isn't just an act of courage. It's an act of surrender. Not giving up, but letting go. Illés and her team used a combination of field recordings, low-frequency tones, and experimental software to build what they called the zone hum, a barely audible drone that fluctuates based on emotional intensity. The hum is never acknowledged by the characters, but it's always there, subtly influencing the viewer's sense of anxiety. It's the kind of sound you don't hear so much as feel in your chest. When Cam begins experiencing memory flashbacks, the hum distorts, becoming warped like a cassette tape stretching too far. It's subtle, but deeply unsettling. The film also used silence as a framing device. Key emotional moments are bracketed by complete audio blackout. No wind, no ambient noise, not even the hum. These scenes are rare, and when they happen, the absence is deafening. One critic called it cinematic apnea, as if the film itself holds its breath alongside the characters. This technique was used most powerfully during the final scene, when Cam reaches for the memory device. As her fingers hover above it, the silence becomes absolute. No score. No Foley. Just stillness. Then, heartbeat. And light. Speaking of the score, it barely exists in the traditional sense. Composer Julian Amaze created what he called a non-score, a collection of tones, textures, and barely their melodies played on instruments pushed to the edge of their sonic range. Violins were bowed below the bridge. Pianos were played with fingertips directly on the strings. The goal was to create music that didn't lead the audience emotionally, but rather followed, like a shadow. The final cue, which plays during the credits, is nothing more than a single sustained note, growing quieter and quieter until it disappears entirely. From a production standpoint, these choices were risky. Films with minimal dialogue and unconventional structure don't often perform well at the box office. But Silent Zone defied expectations. Initially released in a limited number of theaters, it relied on word of mouth and critical acclaim. Early screenings at international film festivals garnered standing ovations. Critics described it as a meditative experience, a masterpiece in sonic storytelling, and the most immersive silence in cinema. What truly catapulted the film into the public eye, however, was its viral moment online. A 90-second clip, Cam walking through the forest, followed only by the sound of her breath and a pulsing hum, was shared on social media with the caption, "This is what grief sounds like." It resonated. Millions watched. And suddenly, everyone wanted to experience the film that used silence to say so much. Box office numbers began to climb. The film, made on a modest $9 million budget, grossed $68 million globally, a staggering number for a slow-burn sci-fi drama. More importantly, it became a cultural conversation piece. Audiences left theaters in silence, not because they were confused, but because they were processing. Because they'd felt something. Classrooms began teaching the film. Audio engineers dissected its use of space. Therapists wrote about its portrayal of grief and trauma. And filmmakers quietly took note. The ripple effect was undeniable. In the end, Silent Zone became a triumph not of spectacle, but of subtlety. It used filmmaking techniques not to dazzle, but to invite. Not to overwhelm, but to whisper. Every shot, every edit, every pause was intentional. Every silence carried meaning, and when the film finally faded to black, there was no swelling score, no grand finale. Just a single breath, a flicker of light, and the haunting realization that silence isn't emptiness. It's everything we've been too afraid to say. As the silence settles and the echoes of Silent Zone slowly recede into the space between memory and meaning, we're left not with closure, but with resonance. This film wasn't made to be solved. It was made to be felt. And over the course of this cinematic journey, we ventured into the depths of its story, its structure, and its soul, each layer revealing something more intimate, more profound, than the last. Like Cam herself, we've walked into the zone with questions, and emerged not with neat answers, but with something better, understanding. From the very beginning, Silent Zone invited us into an experience unlike anything typical of the genre. It defied the conventions of science fiction, stripping away futuristic gloss in favor of elemental truths. We entered a world where silence was not the absence of sound, but a living presence, one that observed, remembered, and responded. And at its center was a character, Cam Reed, who carried not just the narrative, but the film's very heartbeat. Her search for her sister Riley mirrored our own search for meaning within the story, quiet, uncertain, but driven by something deeply human. We explored the movie's plot in vivid detail, from the first steps into Delta 9, through forests that seemed to loop in time, to the underground chamber pulsing with memory and grief. The story unraveled like a riddle, its events flowing with emotional gravity rather than exposition. Every twist was less about revelation and more about reflection. Riley's presence, both lost and found, became the story's compass, leading Cam and the audience through a labyrinth of echoes, fragments, and choices. And those choices, how they echoed through the themes. We delved into the emotional core of the film, analyzing grief, memory, identity, and silence itself as thematic forces. The film didn't present these ideas as abstract, it made them tangible. It asked what it means to hold on to the past, and what it costs to let go. It showed that the loudest truths are often those spoken without words. It dared to propose that silence, when listened to carefully, is not emptiness, it is present symbolism flowed through every image. The recurring tree, growing where no tree should grow, became a totem of remembrance and transformation. The locket, a relic of sisterhood, held more than photographs, it held a thread between worlds. Shadows that stretched without sources. Reflections that didn't quite match. Mirrors that revealed not faces, but memory. These weren't stylistic flourishes, they were the visual language of the zone, and of the characters who moved through it. We also peeled back the curtain to uncover how the film was made. The production itself became an extension of the story. Director Ava Sloan's commitment to authenticity led the cast and crew into real deserts, real forests, real isolation. The silence was not added, it was captured. We heard about the silent boot camp, where actors lived without sound to understand what Cam and Ezra were truly experiencing. We learned how the locations shaped performance, how malfunctioning lights, unexpected weather, and even the occasional animal visitor influenced scenes in ways no script ever could. The filmmaking techniques were as bold as the story itself. Long takes, minimal edits, experimental sound design, and the use of non-musical tones turned Silent Zone into something closer to an emotional landscape than a linear narrative. Luca Moretti's camera didn't observe from a distance. It floated, listened, followed. Fiona Eng's editing let the characters breathe, resisting the urge to cut for effect. Elise Tanaka's sound design made the zone feel alive without ever making it speak. It was all about presence. All about stillness.